All right, nerds, strap in. You asked, and I'm delivering. This is the Wehrmacht mega tier list slash faction breakdown video. Guys, go get a drink, go get a notepad. This is going to be a long one. I have expanded the format a little bit. I'm not going to pay any attention to how long this is going to take. But I want to provide a pretty much complete overview of every unit in the faction, the battle groups. I will be using some charts to map out some things and explain some things. We will talk a little bit about maps at the end, and we will talk about battle groups as well. I got an interesting request on my last video, which was, hey, like, I don't really know what units are in which battle groups, so can you, like, color coordinate the icons? I'm not going to do that because I'm a terrible artist and it would take me too long. So what I've done instead is I've organized the units to follow the battle group icon. So what I'll do is, as we'll work through the default tech tree first. Then we'll go into each of the individual battle groups. I'm going to pull up the battle group screen here. Talk through the abilities and the units. Then we will place the units from the tier maker into the tier maker tree. And we'll do that until we get all the way to the end. In this video, I'm also going to discuss each of the different abilities and how you might consider using them throughout in various situations, various game types, etc. But guys, it's going to be a long one. Like, this could be like 2 hours. I have no idea. We'll see how long this takes. But I wanted to provide something that expanded a little bit on the UK Forces video in terms of the format, in terms of the level of detail. It sounds like more detail seems to make people happy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go deep into the details. So with that, here we go. Starting out with the default tech tree for the Wehrmacht. You obviously have your various tech structures. You have the headquarters, the infantry company, Luftwaffe company, Panzergrenadier company, and the Panzer company finally. These will henceforth be referred to as Tier 0, the headquarters, Tier 1 for infantry company, Tier 2 is Luftwaffe company, Tier 3 is Panzergrenadier company, and Panzer company is Tier 4, okay? I'm going to use those terms throughout the video, so just so you guys know, when I'm referring to the various tier structures, this is what I'm talking about. So, starting out with the units, the Kettenkrad. So, the Kettenkrad is available from your headquarters. It's buildable alongside the Pioneer. This unit, I am sometimes using in 1v1 games, but I am often using it in team games. I'm going to put this unit in the strong category because for the cost of the unit, it provides a great deal of utility through the vision, the ability to capture territory, obviously, and the ability to plant mines and trip flares, which is really handy, especially in the mid game and the early game as you're busy with your pioneers. Overall, it's kind of unique. Obviously, it's a non-combat unit. There are no weapons mounted to the unit, but you can pull off some really cheeky things with this vehicle that I think a lot of people don't really consider. So the Kettenkrad, I'm generally building it on larger, more open maps. Obviously, that's why I'm building it more often in team games. Oftentimes I am also building a second Pioneer because I do want access to a minesweeper, and sometimes I want access to a flamethrower. It's going to depend on the map, but if there's any like urban areas or buildings, I am often going to go for a second Pioneer so I get that flamer access. And of course, you need a minesweeper, guys. It's super, super important. Anyway. So the Kettenkrad, great unit, great utility. Honestly, guys, you should be using this for early game capturing, planting defensive mines, and for spotting. Parking this alongside something like a PAC or a Flak 30 anti-aircraft gun, this thing, or next to your Marders, it's so valuable, so much vision from this unit. And so it's really, really important to keep it alive and to keep it safe. And it gets a good chunk of XP by capturing territory. So what that converts into in terms of the best way to play with it is you're using your main troops, your forces, even your pioneers should be engaging in combat, engaging on the front lines, building fortifications. And the Kettenkrad, if possible, should be doing the majority of the capturing, especially in a team game setting. So that's the Kettenkrad. Pioneers. Pioneers, a lot of people will think, oh my gosh, these guys are bad because they're 3 men, they're super squishy, but these guys are actually not bad. I would consider them average as far as engineer units go. They don't provide any exceptional utility. They don't have exceptional combat power, but I will say, like, complemented by a Grenadier, these guys can fight. They're great against American riflemen when complemented by a Grenadier, because what you can do is the Pioneers have pretty good short-range DPS. I'm just going to pull it up for you guys quickly on the DPS chart here so you can see. We'll compare the Pioneer to a standard Grenadier squad, and you'll notice that the Pioneer, actually the DPS is like almost the same. Is that right? That's crazy. Anyway, sorry. I learned something. Pioneers and Grenadiers have about the same DPS at close range, I'm learning. But Pioneers have automatic weapons, which is really nice. And they actually have a little bit more health per model than Grenadiers do. They have 95 and Grenadiers have 80. So when you're fighting in CQC, merging into a Pioneer squad that's going to continuously deal the damage against your opponent, that can be the difference between winning and losing an engagement against a CQC unit like a rifleman or an engineer. So merging your Grenadiers into your Pioneer is a great way to win those close range engagements if you're using both units together in a fight. They don't have any exceptional utility, like I mentioned, but what they do have going for them is that they are very quick to build and they're very cheap, which makes them also very easy to replace if you lose them. And you can spam several of them if you're finding that you're in need of extra repairs throughout the game and you don't want to go for like a repair bunker yet, which we can talk about a little bit later on when you might do that. So that's the Pioneer. MG42. I mean, right now, currently, in this moment, specifically because of the cloaked MGs available in the Terror Battlegroup, I'm putting the MG in the OP category. These things are an absolute menace right now. The ability to creep between cover and not be detected makes playing against these things a game of cat and mouse. And it's really, really frustrating. I know a lot of people are complaining on Reddit about them. But overall, like, outside of that, the MG42 is just hands down the best machine gun in the game. It's very consistent with the theme of the franchise. And I think general sentiment as far as like World War II engineering goes, like the consensus seems to be that the Germans had the best machine gun. But this unit is critical to surviving the Wehrmacht early game. Going without a machine gun, unless you're playing at like a super, super high level and you're playing really exceptionally well in terms of positioning and map knowledge and all that fun stuff, playing without a machine gun is really, really difficult because the machine gun holds the majority of the Wehrmacht firepower in Tier 1, between Tier 0 and Tier 1. Now, how I'm fitting this into my builds usually is, for example, if I go like a Pioneer opener, so I have 2 Pioneers, then I will build a machine gun and accompany it with a Pioneer, because Pioneers have bonus vision range, not fighting range. they use MP40s, so they don't have fighting range. But they have bonus vision range, which is perfect complement to the MG42, because the MG42 doesn't have exceptional vision range, but it does have exceptional fighting range. So by parking your Kettenkrad or your Pioneer near your MG42, you're able to spot targets from outside of their standard engagement range and deal great damage to them with the MG42 before they can even see or respond to your incoming fire on them. So always keep that in mind when you're using your MG42s. I like to get it out early because getting it out early allows me to spot with my Pioneers and win usually the first engagement. Because oftentimes my opponent is going to get spotted out by my Pioneer and potentially run into the machine gun, and that's going to force them back to base because the Pioneer can kind of just collapse on the suppressed unit and push it back. Things you have to be careful of with the MG42 is if your opponent is playing heavy on scouts or light, ultralight vehicles like the Dingo or the Jeep. Obviously, the MG42 has no answer to that, so that's why keeping it close to Pioneers is so important. Of course, like scouts. Scouts or Pathfinders, they have a great deal of vision similar to the Pioneer, and so they'll be able to spot the machine gun before you're able to engage them and find a position to flank it or get in cover or something like that. But as far as machine guns go, the MG42 is the best of the best in the game. Best damage, best suppression. The only thing that I think the American 1919 has on the MG42 is a slightly quicker setup and teardown time. But other than that, the MG42 is the king in every regard. Unsurprising, I guess you guys might think. That takes us to Grenadiers. This is going to surprise a lot of people, and I think I'm going to get some angry comments about this, but I actually think Grenadiers are strong. Now, people will say, oh my god, like Grenadiers lose to everything, right? They lose to Tommies, they lose to Riflemen, and you're right, they do. They do lose to Tommies, they do lose to Riflemen. These guys are not great past Vet 2. Once Allied infantry gets Vet 2, Grenadiers start to fall off really hard. Because that's when the Allied infantry start to get accuracy buffs, and these guys are super squishy. They only have 80 health per model, so they will drop models very quickly to the Allied units. And they've kind of lost their edge at that point. But that is deliberate. That is a design choice that Relic made when they designed Grenadiers, because what they want you to do is they want you to transition into either Tier 3 or Tier 2 infantry. And eventually Tier 4, you get access to Stormtroopers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, the reason why Grenadiers are strong is because they have a ton of utility. They serve much more purposes than just combat. This is the only line unit in the game next to, I believe, next to Aussies that have the ability to construct defenses, including sandbags and wire. They also have, from their Vet 1, they have access to on-the-field medical kits, which is really fantastic in between engagements, especially if you have several of these. If you can just clump your army around a Grenadier and pop med kits, they'll heal all the units in the area around them, and they'll still be, you know, totally viable units to use in combat, which is great. Now, where these guys actually start to perform decently in terms of combat, at Vet 0, they lose to everything. But once you get Officer Quarters and Vet 1, these guys are actually quite good. They get a little bit of received accuracy, which makes them harder to kill, and that kind of mitigates some of the weakness of the low health pool that they have. If we just compare the DPS between like a Grenadier and say a Rifleman squad, we'll do that here. You'll notice like the Grenadiers actually have an edge for the first few meters of an engagement, about the first 8 meters. This is about 2 volleys worth of shots from the Grenadiers, and then the Riflemen start to overtake them in terms of DPS. If you're engaging your opponent at max range and in cover and forcing them to close on you, you can get some good chip damage in before they close that gap and put you in a position to start losing the engagement. Because once the Riflemen, for example, just get inside of that mid-range bracket, about 25 meters, which is about a third of the maximum distance that you can engage infantry at, they will start to lose, right? So what you want to do with them in the early game is keep your distance, use green cover, build fortifications, and really you just want to keep your Grenadiers together. I say this a lot about the Wehrmacht units. Thematically, Both Axis factions, this is true for. This is also true for UK forces. Americans are a little bit different, and we'll talk about them when we do their video. They're much better when played with their units close together and consolidated in a spearhead form, rather than spread out all over the map, which you probably see from a lot of like USF players. If you like watch me in 1v1s or other players in 1v1s, you don't really want to engage one-on-one engagements between Grenadiers and other units. It's much better off when you have a cluster of like 2 or 3 Grenadiers, and they're able to kind of like protect each other and keep your allied counterparts from closing the gap. What you don't want to do is engage infantry sections specifically at maximum range. Riflemen, absolutely, but infantry sections, you don't. Because the sections have an edge in long range over the Grenadiers. You will pretty much lose every engagement against Tommies in the early game unless you have superior positioning. So this means like you have green cover and they don't, or you have numerical advantage, or if you happen to catch them in a CQC engagement without having to close the gap on them, the Grenadiers will win that also. But these engagements are pretty hard to find until you get Vet 1. Once you get Vet 1, it makes the Grenadiers a little bit more durable in that they're harder to hit, and so they can trade better with the Tommies once they get access to the Vet 1 and the officer quarters. And with all of that in mind, that is actually why I put Grenadiers in the strong category, because if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of your tech tempo and go for early game officer quarters, then your Grenadiers will perform adequately for at least the first like 10 or so minutes of the game. After that, you're going to want to think about using them more for utility, merging them into your stronger units, using them for on-the-field heals, keeping them nearby your team weapons to support with the Panzerfaust snare ability, that sort of thing. But in the early game with officer quarters, these guys are completely sufficient line units, and really like there's nothing wrong with them. Like I said, they have tons of utility. It's all knowing about how to use them properly. So if you have any takeaways from fighting infantry sections versus riflemen in the early game, keep your Grenadiers together, support your MG42. You want to engage riflemen at max range, and Tommies, you just want to make sure that you have superior defensive positioning. So making sure that you're engaging them in green cover, for example. And if you see that you're losing an engagement slowly, don't stay in it. Just back away. Back away. Take your Vet 1 med kits, pop the med kit, heal back up to full health, and then re-engage your opponent where they're going to be at a disadvantage because they took some chip damage from you before, right? So that's Grenadiers. The Sniper. I don't think the Sniper is worth it right now. Personally, I'm not really a fan of like snipers. I kind of hate them by design. So I'm a little bit happy and giddy about this. But I think, I can understand why some people are a little disappointed that snipers aren't stronger. They are quite expensive. They have decent kill potential. But the main problem with snipers is they don't create enough space. And COH3, more than previous titles, is about creating space so that you can get territory ownership, so that you can convert that into a resource advantage. And the snipers just don't do that super well at the moment. They're also highly susceptible to the plethora of light vehicles in this game. They're very easy to chase down and kill. And so I personally don't recommend trying to make snipers work. It usually turns out to be more trouble than it's worth. And even if you're inflicting some economic damage on your opponent, there's lots of like later game counters to mitigate the economic damage that you're dealing to them by sniping their troops. There's lots of abilities in the late game that will allow them to kind of recoup those losses. And so it's a really expensive unit that doesn't convert into control or space or tempo, right? And so for that reason, I think it's kind of in the bad category. The Wehrmacht Mortar. Honestly, it's not bad. It's barely average, I would say. It has slightly worse scatter than the American M1 mortar. It has a decent Vet 1 ability in the flare, which is really great for setting up artillery barrages from bigger units, which we'll get to shortly. But yeah, as far as mortars go, this is a very average unit. There's nothing special about it. It's probably about on par, maybe a little bit better than the British mortar. And if you're struggling a lot with team weapons, this is an easy answer to it in the early game. But what you really want is you want to get to those later game options that are going to scale much better and be much more powerful as the game progresses. So not a ton to say about the mortar specifically. That takes us to the Wehrmacht Tier 3, okay? I got these a little bit out of order. This is Tier 2, this is Tier 3. So I put all of the units from the same tier structure together, okay? Tier 3, categorically at the moment, I would say it's probably a little bit less forgiving than Tier 2. Tier 2 has more versatile options, less purpose-built stuff, and I'd argue more scalable. It has more scalable units in it than Tier 3 does. But Tier 3 has some great tools in it, and I think like there's a place to use Tier 3. I enjoy using Tier 3 from time to time. I do think Tier 2 is more competitive, generally speaking, and we'll talk about why when we get to it. But as far as Tier 3 goes, there's some interesting tools that make for a more aggressive play style. And I'll kind of talk you guys through how this tier structure, from my perspective, was designed to be used. Okay? So, starting out with the Panzergrenadier. This unit is arguably, especially with the new additions from the Terror Battlegroup, these guys are in the strong category. You don't see them that often because Tier 2 is more competitive, but they have really fantastic bundle grenades, probably the second strongest grenade in the game next to the Gammon Bomb for the UK forces. And then they have access to 5 STG-44 automatic assault rifles. And I love them for that reason. I think this unit's a lot of fun. The benefits of this unit is the models in the Panzergrenadier squad are much beefier than other standard allied and I guess Grenadier infantry. So I'll show you guys really quickly. The health pool we'll compare the Grenadier first to the Panzergrenadier. So you can see the Panzergrenadier has 575 health and 5 models that have 115 health each, compared to the Grenadier, where you have 6 models with 80. So you can see the Grenadier is quite a bit more fragile than the Panzergrenadier. This is great because it gives you the ability to pretty safely close the gap with the Panzergrenadier without dropping any models and get into your effective weapon range, which is about 22 meters is like where you start to be really effective. We'll compare this to Riflemen so you guys can kind of see the difference. Now, you'll notice that the DPS curve for Panzergrenadier is actually quite even compared to Riflemen, but as the game progresses and the Panzergrenadiers scale with veterancy, they get much better at close range compared to Riflemen, especially without bars. So, how you want to use these guys is generally from mid to short range, right? You're trying to get in within about that, let me see, 17 range is about halfway. So if you think about where max distance is for your engagements, you want to go about half that distance, and then you're starting to be more effective with the Panzergrenadiers and working within their optimal range. With officer quarters, these guys scale incredibly well. They make excellent shock troops. They're really great for clearing out team weapons, especially with their bundle grenade. And they complement the rest of the Tier 3 structure fantastically, and I'll explain why. So you also, inside of the Tier 3 structure, you have access to the 251 Halftrack. Now, as as a like base level, like unupgraded half-track, this thing is really solid in the early game. The machine gun does damage that's pretty close to on par with the 221. It's just a little bit less maneuverable because it's on a fixed turret on the front of the vehicle. It's great to keep this on the front lines near your troops, providing fire support and also reinforcing squads that are engaging at maximum range. And it can be upgraded into the two following variants here. You've got the medical variant and the Stummel half-track, which I personally am more privy to, and I'll talk about why. So the 251 itself, once you get Vet 1, you get access to the Regal Mine, which is the best anti-vehicle mine in the game. The new DAC battle group also has access to this mine, and what it does is it will one-shot any light vehicle because it does 500 damage. Most light vehicles have between 320 and 480 health. So if your opponent hits a Regal Mine with a light vehicle, it's dead, guaranteed. This can be really useful on maps with a lot of choke points like Pacino or Semois. I'm talking about 1v1 maps for now, but think about like any place that your opponent is going to be consistently driving with vehicles, like on roads, or choke points within like urban areas. This is a great place to plant Regal Mines and potentially pick up what could be a game-winning kill. You know, if you can manage to kill your opponent's light vehicle and convert that into additional momentum where you're able to make better use of your Panzergrenadiers now because you're not being harassed by a vehicle, that's an easy way to win a game, for sure. So normally what I'm doing is I'm keeping this out, engaging with this in the early game, and then as I kind of, you know, get a couple minutes of experience, maybe get Vet 1, lay down a Regal Mine, then I'm thinking about, am I going to convert this to a medical half-track where it's also going to be able to heal my squads and not just reinforce them? Or am I going to convert it to a Stummel? Most of the time, I'm going for the Stummel. And the reason why is the Stummel provides excellent long-range harassment against enemy defensive positions. Think about like machine guns, even just cover positions with infantry in them. And you guys, you've probably noticed about the Stummel, like it doesn't drop models very easily. It kind of takes like a few shots to do that. But what it does fantastically is it softens up targets and creates openings to close with your Panzergrenadiers. So how this ends up working out is your Stummel gets a couple good shots in at long range on maybe, consider like a Tommy squad in some green cover, right? It chunks the squad down to about half health. That creates an opening for the Panzergrenadiers to rush in and secure the killing blow on some of those Tommy models, which is going to help them scale faster because they get extra experience for kills versus just damage, right? So I feel like that the Stummel and the synergy between the Stummel and the Panzergrenadier is probably like the most important part of the Tier 3 Wehrmacht early game. Consider, you know, using your Pioneers, using your Kettenkrad to spot your target, Stummel to soften them up, and then Panzergrenadiers to close the gap and secure the kills and create space, right? What's also really nice about the Panzergrenadiers is once you get access to the Vet 1, you get the automatic fire ability. This is best used in defensive positions where you've secured a cover position and you know that you're about to engage in a prolonged engagement with your opponent. Maybe they're in cover or maybe they're rushing in with like a numbers advantage. Popping automatic fire in those circumstances is great. The only thing you have to be wary of is, does your opponent have a grenade? Because if they do, it's going to put you in a tough spot because it's harder to move after triggering their Vet 1 ability. But if they don't have a grenade, or if they use the grenade already, which happens a lot of the time, right? You start in a cover position, bait your opponent to throw a grenade at you, you step out of the cover, dodge the grenade, move back into the cover, and then turn on your automatic fire and flip the engagement on its head, right? Anyway, those are some of the ways that I love to use the Panzergrenadiers. The 251, as far as light vehicles go, I'd say this is average. It has some decent utility, decent damage, but there's nothing really exceptional about it. The Stummel, when used properly, is very strong. Not only does it provide barrage support, you can also smoke targets, so you can like smoke a machine gun that you've spotted out with your Kettenkrad, for example, and then close the gap and rush in with your Panzergrenadiers, hit the back lines with the Stummel while you're closing the gap. The synergy between these two units is just amazing, and they work really, really well together. If you're planning on using Panzergrenadiers, I would highly, highly encourage you using the Stummel with them, because otherwise you're going to find a lot of situations where it's like you're trying to close the gap, but your opponent is like able to cut you, or they suppress you with a machine gun, or whatever else. And the Stummel alleviates some of that the issues that the Panzergrenadiers have with closing the gap. Medical Halftrack can be great for team games. It also actually has access to the Regal Mine with some veterancy, which is really nice. Not too much to say about this other than like if you're playing with the Halftrack instead, you just want to be much more conservative with your infantry units. Try to like take just a little bit of health damage, then focus your other units on holding the line so that you could safely pull back units to get some health back and then move them back to the front. By doing that, you're going to slowly build a momentum advantage against your opponent, because they're going to eventually have to retreat their troops back to base if they don't have any frontline healing like you do. So something to keep in mind if you're playing bigger team games, this 251 medical variant can be pretty good. Next, we have the Pak 40. This is a standard AT gun. I don't think there's really anything super exceptional about it. The Vet 1 is really nice if you can trigger it. The ability to cloak these becomes very, very important, especially in a team game setting. The ability to conceal the position of your anti-tank weapons and set up ambushes against your opponent's vehicles is really the best way to secure kills with AT guns. It's really hard to do it otherwise. And the Pak 40 excels at that. So as far as AT guns go, I'm going to put that in the strong category. Now, what I would say is like, once you have at least like one of each of these units, now is a great time for you to tech officer quarters. The scalability, and this is also true of the tier 2, which we'll talk about shortly. Getting early officer quarters is going to help your units scale over the course of the game. It gives them extra veterancy. It gives them one veterancy level. It gives them extra experience gain as well, which is going to allow you to out-tempo your allied opponents in terms of the veterancy of your troops, which means your troops are going to hit their maximum capacity faster than theirs are, and that's the power of going for officer quarters. Next, we have the tier 3.5. So there's a tech requirement that forces you that you have to pay for to unlock these two units. You have the Nebelwerfer rocket artillery and the StuG D. Actually, is it the StuG D or is it the StuG G? I always get this mixed up. Where is it? StuG G. Sorry, Dane would kill me if he heard me say that. You guys know Imperial Dane. He's a StuG fanatic. So. Nebelwerfer versus the StuG. The Nebelwerfer is an excellent option for artillery if you're finding that your opponents are really starting to hunker down due to the onslaught of your Stummel and Panzergrenadier combo. If you're finding that your opponent's really like hunkering down, they're getting layers of machine guns, AT guns to deal with your Stummel, they're playing a little bit more defensively, this is a great time for you to side tech into tier 3.5, sorry. Let me see, where is it? Upgrades. Here we go, support elements. So it unlocks the Nebelwerfer. It also unlocks, by the way, support elements. You can build the other tech structure and get access to the other units. This is I'll explain this again when we get to tier 2.5. But basically, you only have to pay for support elements once. So if you, for whatever reason, decided to go Panzergrenadier Company into Luftwaffe Company, you don't need to pay for this twice. You only need to pay for it once, which means if I've started building StuGs and then I decide I actually want to build like some Wirbelwinds, then I can just build Luftwaffe Company and immediately build them rather than having to pay for this again from the Luftwaffe Company. So that's just a little tip if you guys didn't know. Support element unlocks for both tier structures. Anyways, back to the Nebelwerfer. This is a really strong unit. It's got solid scatter, good rate of fire. It does great impact damage. It will damage both vehicles and team weapons and infantry. And it leaves behind a burning crater, which means if your opponent gets hit and they have like a team weapon or an infantry squad, they have to reposition or they're going to die. Which, again, it plays really well into the aggressiveness of the Panzergrenadiers and the Stummel, because if you can dislodge your opponent and cause some chaos in the back line where they're having to reposition or move their units around, that's going to give you the opening that you need to close in with your Panzergrenadiers. Maybe smoke screen with your Stummel, soften up targets. And then obviously you're using your packs to bring up the rear in case they decide to counterattack you with vehicles while you're doing all this. Which also takes us to the StuG G. The StuG G. This is a very interesting vehicle. I know some people have said it's like a crappier version of the Marder. I don't agree with that. This is a frontline vehicle. The Marder is a backline vehicle. Sorry, that's not the Marder. That's the Wesp. I mix them up all the time. This is the Marder. This is a backline vehicle. This is a frontline vehicle. And I have to say, guys, since they made some changes to vehicle loading, or basically the ability for troops to jump on top of vehicles, I love these things, dude. I love them. So typically what I'm doing is I'm not building this against one light vehicle, okay? If my opponent is committing to multiple light vehicles, or they have teched their way into mediums being like the M4 Sherman, the Crusader, the Grant, the Hellcat, the 105 Bulldozer, all those, the StuG is completely capable of dealing with. The StuG has very high frontal armor. Let me pull it up here. So you can see here on the unit, the StuG has very high frontal armor. It has decent speed and acceleration, a perfectly capable health pool of fighting against medium vehicles. And what I'm usually doing in the mid game is I'm loading my Panzergrenadiers onto my StuGs. I'm building usually like 2 of them support each other very well. I don't recommend getting 1 if you're going to go support armor elements. Getting 2 is generally safer because they can protect each other better against vehicle pushes. Loading my PGs on top of my StuGs, and then opening with a Nebelwerfer barrage, maybe a smoke from my Stummel, and then pushing in with the Panzergrenadiers on top of the StuG, because the StuG is faster. It's faster than the Panzergrenadiers can run on foot. So load them on top, close the gap with the StuGs, get the opening shots, and then close in and rush in with your Panzergrenadiers. This tech structure, this composition is built for aggression more than anything. It is kind of difficult to play defensively with this tech structure, which is obviously a limitation. But you can see now that I've kind of described it, how each of these units complement each other within a composition because they're all in the same tech structure. So as far as tier 3 goes, I think there's lots of tools in here for that are very useful. I think it's more built for aggressive players for sure. And it's overall, I would argue this set of tools is more difficult to use than this set of tools. Okay, this is the Wehrmacht tier 2 or the Luftwaffe company, and we'll talk about why. Okay, so there are several gaps within this that leave you susceptible to a few things. One is light vehicle spam. If your opponent gets out 2 or 3 light vehicles and you're not prepared to match with the same number of packs or StuGs, it's very easy for this composition to get overrun because Panzergrenadiers have no anti-tank options, right? We don't even have any light anti-tank options. Tier 2 does. We'll talk about those in a second. But Tier 3, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by light vehicles. But if you play well with your infantry, you support with double packs, and then, you know, you're able to get like a StuG out by the time maybe your opponent gets a second light vehicle, you should be fine, right? But I think the key comes in knowing like where to invest in each of these, and that's really going to be dependent on what you're seeing your opponent build. You want to make sure that you have the same number of anti-tank weapons as your opponent has vehicles at least. And double pack is usually the safest way to go. You can follow up with the StuG later on as you get into the mid game and you're starting to see your opponent emerge some early medium armor. Okay? But in general, you know, this is your core composition for tier 3. That takes us to tier 2. Now, the reason why tier 2 is more competitive is because it has units that are easier to use, are more versatile, and generally scale into the late game better in some ways, okay? So what tier 2 lacks for Wehrmacht specifically is artillery. There's no artillery option in the Wehrmacht tier 2. Now, you can complement that with some things that are coming from the battle groups, which we'll talk about. But as far as the tech structure itself goes, there's nothing special in here in terms of indirect fire. Okay? So that's just something you kind of need to keep in mind. But there are lots of tools to deal with defensive players in here. Okay? So let's start with the Jäger. This is probably going to be unsurprising. Jägers are in the OP category. The reason why is because when equipped with the Panzergrenadier, these guys provide adequate anti-infantry fighting power and great scaling anti-tank and especially anti-dive options with the Panzergrenadier option. Like I mentioned, they scale very well. They will fight barred riflemen. They will fight upgraded Tommies. Not amazingly, but effectively enough that you can, you know, get away with using these as your line units and using your vehicles to do and team weapons to do the bullying of the infantry in the late game. But the Panzergrenadier just makes these guys really, really OP. You can set up some really incredible ambushes with the Jägers because they get access to cloak at Vet 1. They also have access to smoke grenades, which can allow them to, the rifle smoke grenades, I should say, which can allow them to squeak their way out of some dicey situations, break suppression from machine guns, all kinds of things. Great utility in this unit, very powerful. The G43s are okay, but the Panzergrenadier is a much safer, more, I guess, synergistic option with the rest of what comes inside this tech structure. Okay? So overall, Jäger's very strong. A big part of the reason why tier 2 is better than tier 3, I think, honestly. Now, don't get me wrong. The Panzergrenadiers have superior scaling in terms of their anti-infantry capabilities, but because they don't have any anti-tank options and the Jägers do, that is really what separates these two, as well as the cloak. And also Jägers are effective at long range, which makes them easier and safer to use than Panzergrenadiers, which want to close the gap, right? Now, on top of that, we also have the 221 from tier 2. This is a strong vehicle. It is very fragile, but for the timing that it can come out, it has very, very high damage. It is very fast and very effective at killing infantry in the early game. There are two upgrade options for the 221. There is the Panzerbuske, which is like a light anti-tank rifle that gets mounted on top, or anti-tank cannon, I should say. And then there is the radio antenna upgrade. Now, I prefer the latter, personally. I prefer the radio antenna. The Panzerbuske is great if you're struggling against light vehicles. Namely, like this, the Panzerbuske 221 is the perfect counter to the Humber. Because if you use the white phosphorus snare ability from the Panzerbuske, the Humber is almost guaranteed dead because it basically snares the thing in place and it only takes one more shot to kill. Sorry, 1 second here. Realizing that my window was open, so I hope you guys don't mind this break here. And I'm just going to take a sip of water. I've been yapping. Okay, so I prefer the radio antenna because of you retain the strength of the top gun on the 221, and you also get basically not actual map hacks, but we call it the map hacks ability. It allows you to detect enemy units in the fog of war. I don't care if you're in a 1v1 context, a team game context, intelligence is always valuable. And not just valuable to you, but also to your teammates. Being able to anticipate your opponents coming, preparing for attacks, seeing their troop movements through the fog of war, all very invaluable information for you to plan and position your troops appropriately. And for that reason, I prefer the radio antenna upgrade. Now, if I'm facing light vehicles in the early game, I'm going for the Flak. This thing is borderline OP, but not quite. I'm just going to put it in strong. So the Flak does excellent damage against team weapons, especially because it has splash, and you'll notice like anti-tank guns, machine gun teams, they have a tendency to clump. And so the Flak 30 is kind of like a soft counter to team weapon play. Getting at least one of these in a tier 2 composition is pretty essential, especially if you're playing a Grenadier heavy early game. And what's really nice is obviously you can merge Grenadiers into this. This is just a fantastic platform for firepower and pushing power. It's also a great defensive weapon. It has some great abilities in the suppressing fire that it has access to as a additional suppressive deterrent next to your MG42s. And it also has the ability to button and slow down vehicles, which can set up kills for your Jäger and your Marders that you get later on. This kind of rounds out the early game tier 2 composition. I'm usually getting all of these units, at least one of each of them. The 221 usually comes first because, and this is kind of a universal truth, like the earlier you get a vehicle out, the more useful it's going to be and the larger window of opportunity that you have to do real damage with it. So 221 usually comes first. Then if, I'm seeing that my opponent has like a Humber or another light vehicle, I'll go for a Flak 30, and then I'll get a Jäger to back it up. The reason why I don't go for the Jäger right away necessarily is because I may not have enough munitions. I need 90 munitions to get access to the Panzer or because I'm not going to be able to chase an opponent with a single Jäger, right? What I want is the ability to kill vehicles or deal really significant damage in a single volley. And I'm not really going to get that from one Jäger. So the other nice things about the Flak 30, it also acts as a soft anti-aircraft weapon. I noticed this thing actually has a hard time targeting aircraft because it has a limited firing arc. And if it's not positioned like far away from the aircraft, it will constantly rotate itself to try to shoot at the aircraft, but kind of fails to. So if you're planning on using this as an AA weapon, just don't. Wait for the Wehrmacht, and we'll talk about those in a second. And then, so this is kind of like your anchor composition. This is what you're starting with. And then we're getting into the really scary stuff. The tier 2.5. There are a couple absolute menace units in here in the Marder and the Wirbelwind. The Wirbelwind is probably, I think this is probably the crux of what makes Wehrmacht tier 2.5 so strong, and what makes Wehrmacht so strong in the mid game in general. This thing absolutely slaughters infantry. It's well armored. It will trade decently with light vehicles like the Greyhound and the Stuart. It is definitely no match for the Chaffee or any tier 4 vehicles like the Crusader, Sherman, Hellcat, etc. But for those early game vehicles, the Humber it will bully, the Greyhound it will bully, the Stuart it's about even with. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like they're both fighting with like pool noodles, like they're just doing no damage to each other. It takes a really, really long time. Unless one of them gets behind the other. That's the situation in which it might be different. But now, one special thing I want to call out about the Wirbelwind, this is considered a medium vehicle, which means that you will take extra damage in the rear on the Wirbelwind. This is not the case with some of the other light vehicles like the Stuart or the Greyhound or the Chaffee. This is considered a medium vehicle, so it does have the extra received damage to the rear armor. So you just have to be careful how you're positioning it. You can be crazy aggressive with this, and really what you're looking to do is your Wirbelwind is your spearhead unit that you're basically pushing into your opponent with. And your Jäger are providing backup to make sure that your opponent is not able to close and kill your Wirbelwind with vehicles of their own. So it could be like a Crusader or a Chaffee or what have you. The Jägers will protect the Wirbelwind from that. And the Wirbel does amazing in anti-infantry damage. The Wirbel, the closer you get to the target, the more damage you will do. Right? You can see the DPS curve on it here. And when it's close, it does a lot of damage, and it does splash damage as well. So flanking your opponent, getting in their face when their squads are clumped with their infantry is the best way to use this thing. And it's really, really good at also chasing down and killing units. Obviously, just make sure that it's properly supported. But this is like the crux of the Wehrmacht mid-game. In tier 2.5, I'm usually getting 1 or 2 of these, and then I'm starting to think about supporting them with Martyrs, which are basically the long-range anti-tank support that the Jäger fails to cover. So the Wirbel, definitely an OP class vehicle as far as tier 2.5 goes. The Marder itself, I'm putting in average. I actually think this thing is better. It's probably strong in the right hands. It's just difficult to pilot. And what I mean by that is that it's not very maneuverable. It has very slow rotation speed. So positioning with this thing is everything. And also proper use of the Vet 1 ability in, what is it actually called? I think it's called Hull Down. No, it's called Sight Main Gun. Sorry, I'll pull it up for you guys. Here, we'll go back here. So looking at the Luftwaffe company, you can see here are the various options. The Marder here, you can see high weapon penetration, low health, slow, and must face targets directly to fire. And it has access to the Sight Main Gun, which increases the range and the rate of fire, which is really, really nice. So if you position these properly in your backline, to support your pushes from your Wirbel, your Jäger behind that, and then your Martyrs behind that, you can really deal with any kind of oncoming vehicle composition, and you'll have plenty of firepower to make aggressive pushes on your opponents as well. Yeah, like I said, strong in the right hands, but probably, because it's so difficult to pilot, I'm putting it in the average category. As far as tank destroyers go, this thing is among the best, especially the mobile ones. I mean, the Hellcat is better, the Archer is better for different reasons, but this is a great unit to back up your tank pushes with and your Jäger pushes. You just want to make sure that you're keeping them at a safe distance. You're making use of Sight Main Gun for sure. And when are you building these? Usually when you start to face tier 4 vehicles from your opponent, especially if there's some heavy armored variants. So like Churchills, Matildas, Bulldozers, even the Pershing, these will penetrate and can deal really consistent damage to. I'm not really trying to build a ton of these to fight light vehicles because they have a bit of a propensity to miss, and they do also have a very slow rotation rate, so it can be difficult to pick off light vehicles with these, or you can get flanked by light vehicles when you build Martyrs. And similar to the StuG, I'm usually building these in pairs, because 1 is usually enough to deter an opponent's vehicle, but 2 is what you need to actually secure kills. because usually it's like one or two shots from each of the Martyrs added in like some chip damage from maybe a Wirbel or a Panzergrenadier shot is what will kill your opponent's vehicles. I have a game on my Terror Battlegroup how-to video. I'll put the link in the description for this one, where I used a couple of these against DevM or Miguel. You guys might know who he is, because he went heavy on Matildas on a game on Tunis, and these things were invaluable. I think they were both Vet 3 by the end of the game. So you can see some examples of how to use those in that replay breakdown. But yeah, overall, you can see here, based on the comparison of the units in Tier 2, Wehrmacht Tier 2 versus the Tier 3 units, most of the Tier 3 units are in the strong category or average. And, you know, in the Wehrmacht Tier 2, you have 2 OP units in the Jäger and the Wirbelwind. And then you also have some strong units in the 221, the Flak 30. And then, of course, the Marder very nicely rounds out the composition, provides you some great late game anti-tank support. So that does it for Tier 2. Now we're about to go into the Tier 4 structure. By the way, don't worry about the this was already here and I couldn't get rid of it, but there's no Guastatori. So sorry to break your hearts if you thought Guastatori were for Wehrmacht. They are not. They are not in the game. I'm going to put them at the end here. That takes us to the Wehrmacht Tier 4, or the Panzer Company. You can see what it produces in here. Panthers, this is unique to Mechanized, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But basically, from the Panzer Company, you have access to Stosstruppen, or Stormtroopers, the Panzer IV, and the Brummbär. Stosstruppen, I think, unsurprisingly, these guys are OP. They are they are the apex predators of anti-infantry units. Obviously, you know, they come out very late. They are a little bit fragile because they are only a 4-man unit. They are a little bit susceptible to like getting killed by artillery or by vehicles. But I will say, when properly supported by a Grenadier squad, and a reminder, like, this is the importance of keeping your Grenadiers alive, the ability to continuously merge a Grenadier into a Stormtrooper really alleviates a lot of the weaknesses of the Stormtroopers. Now, they have access to a set of, believe they have 3 G43 rifles and 1 MG42 model. There we go, Stormtroopers. You can see them compared to Riflemen. Just dramatically more DPS at all ranges. These guys are very similar to Tommy's in that their DPS curve is quite flat up until about 25 meters, and then it drops a little bit. Looks like their damage drops about, what is that, like 20%, 25%-ish, somewhere in there. But yeah, these guys are just exceptional at all ranges. The best thing that you can be doing with them is fighting with them in cover and using their tactical assault, I believe it's called, to push into enemy machine guns. Where is it? Sorry, it's called shock assault. You can see here, so the ability provides extra 20% accuracy, 50% rate of fire, 20% harder to hit the squad, lowers speed, but is immune to suppression. By the way, for those Allied players or Allied exclusive players watching this video, when you see a Axis player trigger shock assault, throw a grenade at them, because that's the only way you're gonna deter them from just mowing you down. Or obviously, you know, confronting them with a vehicle is a great way to do it as well. But yeah, the Stormtroopers are the apex of anti-infantry units. They come with some damage resistance, so they have about 15% damage resistance and a very high health pool. You can see they have 120 hit points per squad model, but you add the extra, I think it's 15% damage reduction on top of that, and they're fairly beefy. Now, the best thing to do when confronted with Stormtroopers and Grenadiers is, weirdly, kill the Grenadiers first. Because if you focus on the Stormtroopers, the player's just going to merge the Grenadiers into the Stormtroopers after they've taken a couple casualties, and then you're kind of like back to square one. So you have to force the supporting unit off first, isolate the stormtrooper, then focus it down, try to hit it with grenades, hit it with vehicles. I've always said the best way to fight these guys is not to. Just try to avoid them for as long as possible, or only engage them with vehicles if you can. But you can tell how OP they are because of how much I'm talking about how to counter them and not how to use them, because these guys are very easy to use. Like you guys saw, they're effective at all ranges, and they are just an absolute beast of a unit in terms of infantry. And there's a reason why they're at the end of the Wehrmacht Tier 4 tree. So that's Stormtroopers. One thing I want to call out about Stormtroopers as well is the ambush package that's available for Mech Assault. Do not use this. It is not very good. It kind of defeats the purpose of Stormtroopers because they only become effective at short range, and because they're a very fragile unit, it makes them highly susceptible to be wiped. So I don't recommend using the ambush package upgrade from Mechanized Battlegroup, which we'll talk about when we get there. Red phosphorus for grenade, very good. You know, it's a smoke grenade, but it also damages units. Stick grenade assault, very good. Really what you want to use these guys for is to push into enemy machine guns specifically, because they are immune to suppression, okay? And what's really nice is actually when you are suppressed, you can still trigger this ability and your guys will get back up, and obviously you want to make sure that you're targeting the machine gun so that you can decrew it and free up whatever troops around you have that you're trying to push in with, right? Shock Assault, super strong ability, really big part of what makes the Stormtroopers so good. And like I said, you know, this ability is really special for killing or pushing off enemy machine gun positions. Next, we have the Panzer IV. Previously, I'd say many patches ago, maybe a year ago, this thing was bad. You'd never build this. It was garbage. It died to everything. It died to Hellcats. It died to Shermans. It died to Crusaders. It was terrible. And it did very little damage. Now, strong. Since the veterancy rework, plus the buffs to the machine guns on both the hull, the turret, and the pintle, this thing is in a really good place. This is probably the best generalist tank in the game, and you are going to pay for it. It is also the most expensive generalist in the game. That is available outside of a battle group, I'll say that. But it is, you know, generally speaking, it will outtrade Sherman, Sherman, Crusader. The Grant has an edge over the P4 for sure, although I will say it's a little bit closer now since they've had the veterancy rework on the Panzer IV. But this thing is a great late game generalist. You know, as you're combating the opposition's generalist, this is always a pretty good option. Not a lot to say about this. I'd say the hull down is definitely an underrated element of the Panzer IV. So I'll show you guys what that is exactly. So the hull down ability, it doesn't actually explain what it does. So what it does is it gives your Panzer IV damage resistance, 20% damage resistance. It gives it 5 extra range, which by the way means it can trade at the same range as a Hellcat. And it increases the rate of fire. So using these to anchor a defensive position and using this ability defensively in anticipation of an opponent's attack is a great way to use the Panzer IV. I don't see this ability used enough, I'm not going to lie. And by the way, it's not 25 munitions, it's free. You just can't be in combat when you're using it. That's the only difference. But yeah, highly underrated ability. Obviously now they also have the new, they're going to show it in here. Here it is. There's the new ability, Focus Fire. So you can see here, it gives a 40% rate of fire bonus, but it slows down the speed and rotation rate upon the end of the ability. So What you're using this for is if your opponent is pushing onto you, or if you're pushing onto your opponent trying to make a decisive kill or win an engagement, especially against vehicles, that's when you want to use this ability, because it's going to allow you to get the rate of fire that you need to win those engagements. Obviously, you want to make sure that you seal the deal, because if you don't, you're going to be susceptible to getting killed after the fact, because your opponent will easily be able to chase you down and finish you off if you didn't win to the engagement that you committed to. So that's all I have to say about the Panzer IV. Great generalist. Hull down, super underrated ability. Probably the best generalist in the game outside of some of the battle group options, which takes us to the Brummbär. Brummbär also very strong right now. Might even border on OP, because of some of the nerfs to the close range penetration of the allied vehicles in the most recent patch. There was a couple of them that were nerfed. The Sherman is the one that I'm thinking of at the moment. But this is a really excellent anti-infantry option. If your opponent is blobbing, this thing is perfect for it. It has a massive blast radius. It is very slow, and a little bit cumbersome to maneuver with, but it does an absolute boatload of damage to blobs of infantry that are very easily going to be cleaned up by your supporting infantry units as well. Super high frontal armor, which means it can shrug off a lot of anti-tank guns fairly well, unless they're using some kind of ability or are hitting it in the side. It gets bonus armor at Vet 2, is it? Maybe Vet 3? Let's go back and take a look here. I think it's Vet 3. Vet 3, I'm pretty sure it gets bonus armor. Oh, it's Vet 3. Vet 3, it gets extra frontal armor, which makes it super beefy. But you can also see, 300 frontal armor, nothing to scoff at. That is a lot of frontal armor. By the way, a reminder to you guys that don't know, how penetration percentage chance is calculated is it is the penetration value of the gun that is firing. What is that? Is that right? No. Yes, the penetration value of the gun firing divided by the armor value of the surface that it's hitting. So let's take a look at the StuG D as an example. G. Sorry, Dane. You can see here are the penetration values. 250, 200, and 180 are the penetration values on the StuG. What determines how far near versus mid versus far ranges? It actually varies depending on the unit. So I actually can't exactly tell you, but basically you can estimate far is maximum engagement range, mid is about halfway, and near is very close, very, very short range. So you're taking the penetration value and you're dividing it by the armor value, and that is going to be your percentage chance of penetrating. So if we had a StuG firing at the front of a Brummbär, for example, that would be a 60% chance of penetration, which is actually very good. I think the StuG actually has pretty high penetration. Obviously, you're never going to see that in a normal game. But yeah, 60% chance to penetrate, which means 40% chance of bouncing. And so, obviously, as you get access to side and rear armor, that's why your percentage chance of penetration increases pretty significantly. Now, yeah, great for softening up enemy positions. This is a great spearhead vehicle if you don't have access to one of the other heavy tanks in the late game, which we'll talk about eventually. And yeah, in general, especially with skirts, this thing becomes a absolute armored juggernaut of anti-infantry killing capabilities, and is a great vehicle when properly backed by adequate anti-tank weapons. Obviously, the weakness this thing has is it can't really fight vehicles very effectively. If you get lucky, sometimes you lob around and it lands like right on top of your opponent's vehicle as they're rushing you, and it deals good damage. But in general, you're not going to be able to kill vehicles with this thing, so don't try to use it for that. This is dedicated to anti-infantry capabilities. So that's it for the Wehrmacht basic tech structures. We're already up on an hour, but like I said, guys, I'm just going to keep powering through. We're going to go through everything. Watch as much as you want, save, bookmark it, come back later, whatever. But we're just going to go through. We're going to do everything. So HMG bunker, I just don't think this is really worth it for the most part, unless you're playing coastals where you get access to the cheaper coastal bunkers, etc. It's pretty good, but in general, I'm not building the HMG bunker specifically. Now, the other bunker variants, on the other hand, I am actually a huge fan of. And they are highly, highly, highly underrated. Where can I get access to these? Maybe in statistics, buildings, probably. Buildings, no. Oh, that would have been too easy. All right, it's not going to let me look at the bunkers. But essentially, there are 3 bunker variants. There's the machine gun bunker, the repair bunker, and the medical bunker. The medical bunker, hear me, people of YouTube. If you have not seen my gameplay breakdown videos for Wehrmacht, hear this, okay? If you take one thing away from this video, as far as Wehrmacht is concerned, building a medical bunker in your base is infinitely superior to purchasing the medical upgrade for your headquarters. Okay? So I'm going to break open the headquarters here. Upgrades. This is much worse than than constructing a bunker in your base and building the medical station in it. The reason why is because this has a limited radius around the headquarters structure, okay? It will only heal units that are so close to it. Now, you don't always have to build your bunker in your base. You can also build it on the front lines as well, and that's a great way to keep your troops topped up on health, to reinforce them. You want to make sure that you're positioning it behind some kind of shot or sight blocker so that it's not super susceptible to getting hit by indirect fire or spotted by your opponent. Because if your opponent finds it and like hits it with a flamethrower or satchel, it's over, it's dead. So you want to put it in a relatively conservative position. And the other beautiful thing about the Wehrmacht medical bunker is that it collects casualties, same as the American medical tent, which means that as you bring units over to the bunker, they will automatically recoup some losses that you won't have to pay for. So the economic implications are amazing. It also means that you're not having to spend fuel on a tech upgrade, and instead you can spend it on an earlier vehicle, or you can get officer quarters on one of your buildings. Like, look at this, dude. Look at this. No, not produces. We want upgrades, right? Officer quarters, almost the same fuel cost as the medical station, right? So I know I'm not alone in this. There might be some people that disagree with me, but I think categorically high-level players would tell you the medical bunker is a better choice than the medical station, okay? There are some situations that you may need to get this, but even like comparing officer quarters from our tier 1 structure versus comparing officer quarters versus the tech upgrade, like from this, I'm getting medical kits on all Grenadiers that I build. That's great. I get on the field healing. I get better combat capabilities from all of my headquarters units, my MGs, my Pioneers, my Grenadiers. This is just way better thing to invest in than spending fuel on this medical station. That's the end of my rant about medical. Sorry, guys. On top of that, you also have your repair bunker, which functions exactly the same as the heavy armored version for the British. It will repair all vehicles in a radius around it automatically. This is way better than rebuilding or building like 3 or 4 Pioneers. okay? And you can help your teammates, right? And it can repair, I'm pretty sure, an infinite number of vehicles around it. So you will be a big time team player if you're putting this, somewhere just off of the front line that your teammates and you can bring your vehicles to get repairs and keep your, vehicle uptime at its absolute peak. So I'm a big fan of the other bunker variants. MG, I'm not building so much. Sorry, I should have put this over here because this is exclusive to the Coastal Battle Group. Now we're getting into the Battle Group units, okay? So starting out, Mechanized. Mechanized is probably the most versatile and has, you can see here, also has the most units out of any of the Wehrmacht battle groups. And all of these units are great, dude. I'm gonna go into it. The strong category is about to get very busy. So the Wesp is it's different from the Nebel in that it fires faster. It hits a little bit harder in terms of the direct impact damage, but it doesn't do any it doesn't do any incendiary effects like the Nebelwerfer does. This is far superior to the Nebelwerfer, specifically for confronting emplacements, okay? This is much, much better for dealing with emplacements than the Nebelwerfer is. The Nebelwerfer got like quite a few nerfs against emplacements in the last couple of patches, and so the Wesp is a much better choice. You usually need like a pair of them, but if you have a pair of them, it's pretty easy to chunk through any allied emplacements that you're coming up against, whether that's the 105 from the Americans, maybe the 17-pounder emplacement from Aussie Battle Group, what have you. It also has access to the tracking barrage, which is it's not as good as it was last patch, but it's still pretty solid choice. So this is just a great uptime, mid-tier mobile artillery unit. Big fan of the Wesp. Thank God it got nerfed last patch. Last patch it was absolutely busted because it had no scatter and tracking barrage would just snipe units from everywhere. Anyway, the Wesp, I'm actually just going to put it in the average category because it's a little bit more purpose-built for emplacements compared to the Nebel. Obviously, the other benefit of this is that it's an armored unit, and the Nebel is obviously a team weapon, so it's a little bit more fragile in that way. But the Wesp is a great option if you have gone for Tier 2, for example. We talked about how Tier 2 does not have any indirect fire. The Wesp is a great way to bridge that gap and give yourself an option for some mid-game artillery. Next, we have the Panther. And the Panther is definitely not OP, but it is a very, very strong tank hunter. I love this thing. Very unique identity in this game compared to COH3. It's not as fast as it was, but it is a bit of an armored juggernaut, and it is absolutely a tank hunter. And hear me again, guys. This is not an upgraded version of the Panzer IV, okay? This is a dedicated tank hunter. This thing is not very good at killing infantry. It can, but it's not very consistently good at it. What you want to use this for is the answer to allied mid and late game tanks. So going toe-to-toe with Grants, with Crusaders, Matilda, Churchill, all of those, the Panther has very high penetration, very high health, and does 160 damage per shot, which most vehicles in this category do not. Most vehicles do 120 damage to vehicles, with the exception of the tank hunters or the tank destroyers like the the Marder, the American Hellcat. I don't think the UK have any vehicles that do 160 damage, but the Panther does. The Panther does 160 damage per shot, and this increases even further to 200 at Vet 3, which is crazy. It has a very solid rate of fire, very high frontal armor. You'll notice it has higher frontal armor than the Brummbär does. So it's very good at bouncing AT guns or medium tanks, medium tank fire. Positioning your frontal armor is obviously very important because you'll notice the side armor is even less than half of what the frontal armor is. So the best thing that you can do with this, build a pair of them and use them to hunt down your opponent's vehicles in the late game. That's what these things are built for. You'll notice they are quite expensive on the manpower side. And so you do want to make sure that you have adequate anti-infantry capabilities. And with the Mechanized Battlegroup, you actually have two options. So this is actually a good time for us to go into the Battlegroup breakdown piece. So we'll look at Mechanized first. So here's the Mechanized tree. You have Raid Package, the StuG Assault Group, 8 Red, Panther Call-In, and Panther Production Unlock. Okay, you have two options here for the Panther at the end of the tree. On the mechanized support side, you have repair crews, spotting scopes, the assault package, which I said never get this. This is terrible. I mean, you can select this, but just don't actually build it on your STAS. Sometimes, if you just want to beeline your way to mech assault or zeroing artillery and bypass the WESP, you can do that. But don't build this. It's not good. It needs some help. It needs some love from Relic before it gets used. With the WESP, like we talked about, mechanized assault, which is a really great ability we'll talk about shortly, and the zeroing artillery barrage, which is just like a giga territory wiping off map, but obviously has a big delay and is pretty easy to dodge. So overview, Mech Battlegroup. We'll talk about the rating in a minute here. I just want to talk about the structure and like how I usually progress through these trees. Normally, we're beelining it for either the StuG Assault Group or the 8 Rad. 8 Rad is a great complement to Tier 3 more so than Tier 2 because the 8 Rad and the Wirbelwind are kind of redundant with each other. They both kind of do the same thing. The 8 Rad is kind of just like the Wirbelwind's little brother that's faster, but a little bit less lethal. So this can complement a Tier 3 composition quite well, backed up by packs, Panzergrenadiers, and they deal limited damage to the what is it called? The light vehicles of the allies, so like the Stuart, the Greyhound, Chaffee. It does okay damage again, but it's soft countered by most of them. This is mostly good against infantry. So you're going for either the StuG Assault Group or the 8 Rad. I am more privy to the StuG Assault Group. It comes with the StuG D, which is the anti-infantry variant. This is the same vehicle as the DAC version in DAC's Tier 2.5. It's classified as a lobber, which means it lobs the rounds kind of like, it looks kind of like a mortar shell. It's not quite though, but it's a very slow moving projectile, and it does pretty good AoE damage to infantry units around the impact area. And it also comes with a Stosstruppen. There's one more battle group that also comes with an early Stosstruppen we'll talk about, but getting Stosstruppen early can be really nice because normally these guys come out at Tier 4, which is usually pretty late in the game. But by getting them early, you're able to like vet them up faster. The allied counterpart infantry is not going to be quite as strong or as vetted up. And you can get these guys to do a ton of work when combined with the StuG. And the StuG and the Stosstruppen kind of have a similar dynamic to the Panzergrenadier and the Stummel, except it's just better. It's just better. The StuG, it has more armor, it does more damage than the Stummel, and the Stosstruppen does more damage at all ranges than the Panzergrenadier does. So it's kind of just like these two are like the big brothers of this combination right here. Okay. And for that reason, can be very strong, allows you to prioritize packs, and then you can actually bypass Tier 3.5 if you want. Like you can bypass these units, go for the WESP as your artillery rather than the Nebelwerfer and go straight into tier 4. Start getting your Panzer IVs out, or you can go for Panthers, the producible Panthers. This is one of the benefits of the Mechanized Battlegroup, is it fills a lot of the gaps of the 0.5 tech structures, like tier 2.5 and tier 3.5. And it allows you to bypass those so that you can get to tier 4 earlier and get some of the other heavy tanks out, like the Panther and the Brummbär and the Panzer IV. Overall, I think Mech is probably like as close to an OP battle group as you can get, but still being strong. I had you there, didn't I? I was almost going to put it in OP. No, it's not OP. It's not OP. It is very good. Like I mentioned, it does have lots of... I'm actually putting the 8-rad... We'll come back to the 8-rad in a second. I'm putting it in the strong category because nothing about it is inherently OP anymore. If we look at the different ability options, Raid Package is really nice, allows your vehicles to capture territory, and they all have access to smoke that is on board the vehicle. The zeroing artillery barrage has always been pretty good. It's really great at clearing out areas or setting up behind your opponent as like a great way to kind of close a pocket on them. A great way to use this is get some recon from a teammate, drop this behind your opponent, and then attack them. And in their panic, they will either completely fold to your attack, or they'll back into the zeroing artillery barrage, and it'll decimate them completely. This used to be OP because Mech Assault was super busted. It used to repair, like, I think it was like 20 health per second. You can see they nerfed it pretty significantly. The vehicles, like, you could just click this ability and then just drive your vehicles in and win no matter what. It was crazy. Thank God it's been patched, that ability. This ability is not nearly as strong as it was anymore, but it is still very good. This Mechanized Assault ability is very good. It will save your vehicles from death by one shot, effectively, if it's used during an engagement. And it also gives your infantry that are around vehicles some great buffs. So this is really, really good for attacks or defensive maneuvers. When you're either doing a big push or getting pushed, your infantry and your vehicles will perform better, and your vehicles will be more durable. As far as the tree goes, like I mentioned, I'm usually going Raid Package StuG, then choosing whether I'm going to go for the Call-In Panther or the Producible Panther. If I decide to go tier 2.5, then I might bypass the StuG. I might even skip the 8-rad, and I'm building my usual Wirbelwinds plus Jägers plus Marder combo. And then for the late game, to kind of finish the job and really make sure that I'm not susceptible to any big tank dives, I go for the Call-In Panther over the producible one. This allows me to bypass tier 4 a little bit, take advantage of the really strong mid game of tier 2.5, but still have a late game answer to any late game armor that the allies may bring out. Whew. Okay, so that's Mech. That is an overview of Mech. I think we talked about all the abilities here for them. Oh, we didn't talk about these, sorry. Repair crews, this is really great in team games, especially if you've gone for like the radio antenna upgrade or the medical variant of the 251, because you can also repair vehicles. I am more privy to spotting scopes because adding this on top of your StuG D, your Panthers, it basically just allows you to see all the way out to maximum firing range, and can be more effective in a defensive context for that purpose. The WESP we already talked about. This is less CP, so you can use this to bypass and get to the abilities faster. But generally, I'm selecting the WESP and then going for whichever of these is more appropriate. Usually, I find myself selecting Mech Assault more often because I'm more of a small game player, like 1v1s, 2v2s. It makes it harder to use something like zeroing artillery barrage. And it's also less expensive, as you can see. It's 120 munitions versus 200 here. Now, on to coastals. The anti-tank bunker is fine. It's actually quite strong. These can be abused pretty well because of their absolutely massive range. I think they have like 80 range or something crazy like that. But there is no vehicle that outranges this. And when you stack a bunch of them up, you could really lock down a position on the map. Coastals, I think, are in kind of a weird spot because I feel like they're pretty easily countered by proper artillery usage. I think the thing that most players will find is that, like, at whatever level they're at, there's a good chunk of players that just don't know how to properly use artillery against coastals. And so you can absorb a lot of pressure with this battle group. Here, let's break it open here. So you have designate defensive lines, support bunkers, obviously coastal reserves, access to artillery officer, designated artillery overwatch. This is just the greatest way to lock down the areas around your bunkers if they're ever threatened by enemy infantry or light vehicles. Bulwark is the obvious choice between these two. I don't think I ever see anyone call the reserves because I mean, usually you don't have that much infantry around, and it's kind of expensive. Like, it's 100 munitions, so unless you've got, like, PGs or Stosstruppen around, it's probably not worth it. Bulwark is just a lot better because you get the passive repair on all of your bunkers. They get more health, which just is going to make them harder to dislodge over the course of the game. And it's just less micro tax for you, having to go and repair bunkers in between volleys of artillery or whatever else they are facing. The coastal squads themselves are pretty mediocre right now. They're not really great in combat. I kind of think it's fine, honestly. They get, you know, good construction bonuses. They're decent on the defense. They have a very interesting and unique anti-tank grenade, but they're terrible on the move. A little fun fact about these guys can actually be used with transfer orders from the Wehrmacht, what is it called? The infantry company. I wonder if, is it considered an ability? No, I don't think it is. Okay, no, I can't showcase it, but you guys will know what I'm talking about. Infantry company, transfer orders, which is basically the ability to promote your grenadiers. You can also promote the coastal squads, which is kind of funny. They're a little bit cheaper than the grenadiers, so you can do that. That's kind of funny. I don't know if it's considered an exploit or not, but pretty interesting. Support bunkers, generally I'm going for so that I get access to the AT bunkers if I'm going to use this. Plopping these up and, you know, supporting them with MG bunkers or screening them with coastals. Just a really great way to, like, keep light vehicles or other vehicles out of a concentrated area. They're relatively low pop cap, so you don't have to worry about you know, how much this is going to cost you over the course of a long game for the most part. Designated artillery overwatch, much better option for team games especially. Sometimes in 1v1s I would use rapid fortifications. You could build cheaper bunkers with discounted upgrades. This is really nice for building, like, medical bunkers or forward AT bunkers as you're kind of... I had a really interesting tier 3 build that used this last patch, but tier 3 kind of got cooked when PGs got nerfed, so I haven't been using it as much recently. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. The better option here is coastal wall. The Obice is way more fun. Take your pick. Honestly, I feel like if you're playing this battle group, you're playing for fun, not to be competitive. Yeah, I would say, you know, coastal wall is definitely the more competitive option, but the Obice, lots of fun. Probably great in team games when you're facing a lot of blobs or heavily defended positions. So both of these are decent options. So as far as coastals go, I put coastals in bad. They're just not a very good unit. They don't perform well in combat. They don't scale. They're good for the purpose of putting up defenses and, you know, anchoring. They will win engagements if they're able to engage at max range from green cover, which is kind of nice. And they're also very cheap to reinforce and very economical because of the free bunker reinforcement that you get. Artillery officer is also in kind of a rough situation since it got the nerfs that it did. This thing used to be wildly OP, but now since the artillery ability is now canceled upon being suppressed, it's kind of difficult to use this against team weapons. But it does offer some decent scaling to your infantry and defensive territory as it gets veterancy. So for that reason, like, actually, I think I'm gonna change my mind and move this up to average. This guy is okay, but he used to be up here. He used to be like crazy good with the we called it the wizard, the artillery wizard, because he basically just calls it down from the sky. Balthazar, I think, is what Momo called it, which is similar to, I think there's like a Total War character, or a Warhammer character that is like a mage. Anyway, I digress again. He can call artillery from the sky, which is pretty good. Coastals, overall, I think they're in a rough spot. I think they're bad at the moment. The Obice, as far as artillery goes, I'm not a huge fan of static artillery emplacements at the moment, and the Obice is in that category. Unfortunately, I feel like these are just too easily countered by the mobile options. Like, if you get double bishops to fire at this thing, it'll clear it out pretty easily. And if you plant this thing too far back from the line, then the scatter on it is so bad that it has a really hard time hitting the target. So, again, you know, like I said, this is kind of a for fun battle group. Use at your own discretion. Next, we have Luftwaffe. So, Luftwaffe, decent battle group. I'll break it open here for you guys. So, overall, it's not nearly as good as it was before. It used to be like an S-tier Wehrmacht battle group. What made it an S-tier Wehrmacht battle group was access to infantry reserves, which were great for your manpower economy in the late game, and the Stuka loiter, because the Stukas they would strafe infantry, they would strafe vehicles, deal adequate damage. When combined with like the state of Panzer IVs that they were in, you actually had a decent late game with this battle group. But now, since the Stuka loiter has been pretty significantly nerfed on the anti-vehicle side, I find that this battle group struggles with late game armor. You do have the Flak 36, but this thing becomes very difficult to protect against like indirect fire, like bishops or the BL5, for example. Even the 105 howitzer, this can be very difficult to protect from those. But it is kind of, you know, a late game answer to enemy armor. If you can protect it, this can be a decent choice, but most competitive players are going for the infantry reserves and opting to convert that into more units in the late game. Now, since then, I consider this, it's still decent. I've seen a lot more players going for fragmentation bombs recently. This is a really excellent way to clear out team weapons or infantry positions, and does a lot of damage. Will pretty much kill anything that it hits in terms of infantry or team weapons. You can get some really, really nice wipes with it if you're quick. And I've seen this choice favored more over the Stuka loiter recently. Strafing run and reconnaissance run are both good. Obviously, they serve different purposes. This can be super annoying. I played a game today, actually, where somebody was strafing me. I was playing a 2v2, and it was like I was getting strafed almost every time my machine gun caught them out of position. And it basically would pin my machine gun so that their infantry were free to kind of like move again. So it's very forgiving ability. Can allow you to salvage a lot of situations that are initially not looking like they're in your favor. So really, really strong early game ability. Reconnaissance run, kind of self-explanatory. You know, you can use that if you see fit. This can be really good if you're going for like a tier 3 build with Nebelwerfers and you need access to recon. This is a good choice. Fallschirmjägers. This is a very niche unit. I feel like a lot of people feel like these guys are bad, but they are not. They are very good. This is a very, very good infantry unit, but it needs to be used in a very specific way. I do have a game on YouTube that maybe I can throw in the description as well on Semois, where I used the Fallschirmjägers. I think it was last patch. Now, they haven't been changed since then, but it really showcases and highlights how to properly use this battle group, and specifically the Fallschirmjäger unit. This is an ambush unit. How you should be using it is taking short engagements where you're taking advantage of the ambush bonus, you're dealing chip damage to your opponent, and then you're backing away to regenerate the health that you lost or traded. And you're basically slowly whittling away at them with these guys as they scale up to Vet 2 and Vet 3. And then they become hyper capable combat units. Their biggest weakness is that they are very fragile. They will often lose engagements in which they are like fully committed to. So if they get like jumped on top of by a couple riflemen or a Gurkha squad or Rangers or something like that, it's best usually to just retreat them. But if you can manage to pull off the ambush bonus and start the engagement at like a mid or a medium range, mid to long range, I guess, the Fallschirmjägers are quite good. I'll pull up the DPS curve for them really quickly so you guys can see what they look like. They have a pretty flat DPS curve. You can see they do a lot of damage, but their main weakness is their small health pool. You can see what I mean when I say like riflemen, they can basically afford to take a couple casualties. And then like if I have double bars, for example, let me pull that up. We'll pull up double bars. You'll notice like, you know, if I close the gap and I drop a couple models, but I've got both my bars, I've still got more than enough DPS to adequately engage these guys, right? And so what you want to be doing is taking those short engagements, dropping like a couple of models from your opponent, and then either finding a really good cover position to defend from or disengaging entirely and having like your Grenadiers hold the line or your MG42 backing you up or distracting them with a vehicle while these guys pull away and engage their self-healing ability, their first aid kit. This is not what it is. There it is. It's Airborne Spirit, not med kit. It's Airborne Spirit. This is their Vet 1 passive. They restore health out of combat and they have extra capture speed, which is really nice. If you play your economy really well, I've had games where I could get like 2 or 3 of these guys out at a time. They're pretty wild. They have access to Panzerfaust, which is really nice. They can breach, which is completely useless. Haha. They also have access to grenades. But like I said, this is a very strong unit, but it's very expensive and it needs to be used a specific way. If you're using this like a Panzergrenadier, you're doing it wrong. They are not nearly as beefy as Panzergrenadiers and they are super expensive to reinforce, which by the way, that's why you want to keep a Grenadier nearby so you can merge into them. But yeah, overall, like Fallschirmjäger, very strong unit, but needs to be used to its peak using the ambush bonus and then disengage from your opponent, re-engage them again, bleed them some more. You do that enough times, you'll hit critical mass of units, your opponent will spend all their time and resources reinforcing, and you'll be able to mount a large economic advantage that you can convert into units and win the game with. Fallschirmjägers. Fallschirm Pioneer. Not bad. Really best for like team game setting and early game tempo, I think. There is some nice utility that they come with access to a free sweeper, satchel charges, and then the grenade launcher and light machine gun upgrades that they can get. They are a little bit on the expensive side, so I'm not usually building these in a 1v1 setting. But in team games, they can be really good at seizing like a frontal building or an early game defensive position that is going to slow down your opponent and allow you to kind of fortify and capture your side of the map more quickly. So Fallschirm Pioneers, can be good for that purpose, but otherwise I'm not typically using them very much in a 1v1 setting. LG40 is just kind of a crappier Pack 40. It does have like an anti-infantry toggle that is decent, but I don't love these. They're good for like if you're facing a really early M3 and you don't have a pack out or you don't have any kind of answer to it, this can be a great answer for you to kind of drop in your base, and then now you have something that you can fight that early light vehicle with. But generally I'm not very often dropping this in. I'm usually just selecting this to pass my way to infantry reserves. The anti-air emplacement, I wouldn't recommend placing these on the front line because they're pretty susceptible to indirect fire or anti-tank guns. These are best placed behind your lines as aircraft protection. If you're playing against somebody who is using Airborne Battlegroup or is using the Air Support Center for the Americans, or somebody that is using Air and Sea Battlegroup for UKF, planting a couple of these is going to allow you to pretty much completely shut down their aircraft. However, I do want to caution you guys from building these like right away and just jumping like, oh, I need AA, so I'm going to build this. There are plenty of other anti-aircraft units in the Wehrmacht roster. Namely, the Wirbelwind, if you're playing Tier 2. This thing kills planes, I think, faster than anything else besides the quad. I think the quad kills things faster, but this is like the apex anti-aircraft unit. If you're planning on playing Tier 2 already, then I wouldn't bother, Tier 2.5 I should say, I wouldn't bother building the Flak 38. But if you're playing like Tier 3 and maybe you've gone for packs, you don't have any other form of AA, but you need some, the Flak 38 can be decent. That's all I'll say about that. Flak 36 emplacement we kind of already touched on. This thing is okay, but you know it's very susceptible to indirect fire once it's been spotted. It is kind of the answer that this battle group has to late game armor, but just unfortunately because of how strong the indirect options are, it can be kind of difficult to protect this thing and keep it alive against like a double bishop, for example. So I'm usually going for infantry reserves for that reason. So based on what we talked about, Luftwaffe Battlegroup, we'll put it in the strong category. It's got lots of units that are very useful. This unit is average. Fallschirmjägers we talked about, I think are very strong. Fallschirm Pioneer has a specific purpose, but is a very average unit overall. And like I mentioned, Fallschirmjägers in the context in which they are intended to be used, this is a very strong anti-infantry unit. Well, unit in general, because it also has access to Faust and Cloak, which fits really well into the rest of the Wehrmacht roster. We talked about the emplacements. I'm not usually building this. I kind of think these are just too... I mean, you know, this you can build, but again, I don't really encourage building these. The emplacements are in kind of a weird spot right now because of how indirect works, but I don't know, I don't want them to make emplacements too good because then it's going to be too hard to actually use like units and just instead of just building Sim City, which is a term that we would use to describe players who would just build structures and emplacements in like COH3. And was, you know, it is kind of a thing in this game too with like Coastal Battlegroup. I don't love that kind of gameplay. It's it feels kind of boring, I feel like, a lot of the time, except maybe for the player who's building the Sim City. So yeah, but overall I kind of feel like these things aren't great. They do have their niches and their uses, but in general I'm not really going for them. That takes us to Breakthrough. So let's jump over to Breakthrough here. Just going to collapse these. We'll open up Breakthrough. Breakthrough is a really solid battle group. I've come a long way on how I feel about Assault Grenadiers, but we'll talk about those in a minute. The way that the structure is laid out, you really have three essential choices. Your first option is you can beeline your way to Mechanized Assault Group. This is a 251 half-track that comes with a very early Stormtrooper squad. Really, really excellent synergy, kind of like we talked about. It's if you convert it into a Stummel, it's kind of like the 251 is the little brother of the StuG III. The Stummel is the little brother of the StuG III, and the Stormtroopers just complement that really well because the Stummel will do the chip damage, and the Stormtroopers will clean up the damaged units that are left behind. So this is a very solid unit. Breakthrough, super, super strong ability. Lasts a really long time and is really cheap. This might be one of the best parts of this battle group. You can get insane tempo, especially in a 1v1 setting where you're not running into opponents as often across the map. 100% capture and decapture rate is pretty bananas. It allows you to just vacuum up the map after a very successful push. So Breakthrough, really excellent ability, especially for 1v1. In team games, smoke bombing run might make a little bit more sense because you can set up big attacks with the smoke, or protect a retreat path maybe. with the smoke bombing run, and you're not able to capture quite as much territory just because there's a lot more space in between territory points. And in team games, you're running into a lot more opponents, so you're not able to spend as much time capturing territory after a one engagement. The Assault Grenadier package is not bad. Grenadiers themselves are quite fragile, but this package can be pretty good in the early game if you're facing a good amount of ultralight vehicles. The MP40s have decent penetration and are obviously an automatic weapon, which means you can deal more DPS to those smaller ultralight vehicles. What's really nice about these is the access to sprint and the fact that the Grenadiers retain their ability to Faust. It allows you to do things like catch out a Humber, for example, if he's slightly overextended. Being able to use sprint into Panzerfaust on the Assault Grenadiers can be a really nice way to catch your opponent making a mistake where they've overextended and land a snare that's going to allow to give you a window to capitalize and kill your opponent's vehicle. Same rule with these guys generally applies. Like, they don't scale similar to regular Grenadiers. Once Allied infantry is hitting Vet 2, these guys are having a hard time. But they are nice for an aggressive early game if you are choosing to lean into Grenadiers. I would say getting the officer quarters from the infantry company is super, super important if you're going to go for Assault Grenadiers, because otherwise, like, your guys are going to take too much damage on the approach, and you're just not going to be able to get good use out of the MP40s. On the other side of the tree, we have Rapid Production, the 2.5-ton cargo truck, Blitzkrieg, and then the P4 Command and Tiger tank. Now, as far as these two options go, I'm almost never going for the cargo truck. The tempo that you get from being able to construct your vehicles 75% faster is just invaluable. Anytime that you're thinking about getting the cargo truck, honestly, you may as well just get a cache. It's basically the same effect. Cache is a little bit cheaper than this. The only time you might consider using this is if you've got like a already cached high fuel point and you want to extract even more fuel from that point by getting the truck. And generally, I would say only doing that in a team game setting. Otherwise, I'm not usually getting this. Rapid Production is much better and is going to be useful throughout the game, and is free, which is really nice as well. Blitzkrieg. This ability is so underrated. Oh my gosh, it is so underrated. This is probably this is probably the best armored ability in the game. The 40% rate of fire bonus on mid and late game vehicles is just bananas. Like, putting this on like a Wirbelwind, it just shreds everything. It's crazy. The extra speed is really nice, obviously, because you're able to capitalize on like a big push. You can also use this defensively, if you're trying to create space between you and your opponent. This can be used for that purpose. And I don't think it's units, it's vehicles are 35% harder to hit, which is super nice. It can be the difference between an AT gun, killing your tank and missing. I had an engagement where I had a Sherman miss a Panzer IV 3 shots in a row because of this. And it frustrated the crap out of me. But this ability is really excellent if you're planning a big push and has fantastic synergy with all armor in the game, especially the Tiger tank. The Tiger has a really slow rate of fire, and it's just generally a slow vehicle. So using Blitzkrieg allows you to really, one of the things I love to do is when my Tiger hits the field, the first engagement that it gets in, I use Blitzkrieg if I have the munitions, because it's allowing me to maximize the shock value of the unit, right? I'm able to deal the most amount of damage when my opponents are least prepared to deal with it, right? And that is what makes Blitzkrieg so awesome. So saving munitions for this ability in the late game and, keeping your armor alive, this ability is just incredible, and probably the highlight of this battle group, as an ability, not as a unit, I would say, is the best ability in this battle group. especially in the late game. And then, of course, we have our Panzer IV command tank. This got a nice buff. Now it actually benefits from armored skirts, which it did not previously, which is really nice. And the Tiger tank. Now, I think we all are, unsurprisingly going to be leaning towards the Tiger tank. I do want to talk about the Tiger tank specifically and its identity compared to the other heavy tanks. You know what I should do? I should make a heavy tank tier list. That would be like a 5-minute video, but I should talk about the differences between the heavy tanks. The Tiger is probably the second best heavy tank in the game, next only to the Pershing. The reason why the Pershing is better is because it's faster, it has a higher rate of fire, and it has access to the HVAP precision shot stun ability, which the Tiger just doesn't have. But otherwise, the Tiger is amazing. I don't think I really need to say much about it. I feel like its reputation pretty much precedes it. Tiger, I would put, generally speaking, in the OP category. Battlegroup is going to go in the strong. This thing is bad. And then we'll talk about this one shortly. Tiger, it's all around super strong, great frontal armor, great damage against vehicles, damage against infantry. It is pretty mobile, not as much as the Pershing, but as far as heavy tanks go, it's the second most mobile heavy tank in the game next to the Pershing. Fits really well into pretty much any Wehrmacht composition. What I see a lot is players playing, for example, a heavy tier 2.5 build into the Tiger call-in to kind of seal the deal. I'll share my Terror Battlegroup video in the description below where I do something very similar, and my capstone unit is the King Tiger in that particular case. You can do the exact same thing with the Breakthrough Battlegroup. Use the Tiger as your capstone unit and lean very heavily into your tier 2 or 3.5 units, and then use the Tiger to seal the deal. Overall, this battle group is amongst it's probably top 3. Let me look here. Yeah, I would say the best battle groups in the game right now are probably in order: Terror, Mech, and Breakthrough are probably tied for second/third. They're both very good, but just different in what they do. Mech has more overall units to add to your roster. Breakthrough is much better for aggressive, has some strong abilities. I mean, both of them are very good and very different from each other. I would say Mech is probably better in games where you're going to be dealing with a lot of medium armor. Mech is probably better because you could build multiple Panthers. You can only build one Tiger. I've run into the trap in several games of building the Tiger against triple Crusader or triple Easy 8 or something and just getting outnumbered. You need to make sure the Tiger has adequate support via Martyrs or Panzerschrecks. StuGs are even great support for the Tiger, but it's not a lone wolf unit compared to the Pershing. Honestly, the Pershing is really, honestly guys, the Pershing since its release is just Tiger 2.0. It does everything the Tiger does, but just better. Except maybe anti-infantry damage. The Pershing probably not quite as good as the Tiger is. But everything else, it's pretty much better. And I believe that takes us to Terror, the last battle group. Oh, I'll say, sorry, quick comments about the Command Panzer IV. If you're having a rough early game, this can be a great unit to kind of save you in a sense, and it does complement all of your units very well. It provides aura abilities to your infantry and your vehicles. Extra armor, rate of fire can be really, really nice on the vehicles that are supporting it. To my knowledge, this is identical to the DAC version of the same tank. And like I mentioned, it also benefits from skirts, which is really nice. So if you're having a really rough game and you're afraid you're not going to make it to Tiger, or you need an answer to a vehicle that you weren't expecting, and you need some kind of like anti-vehicle unit, the Panzer IV Command Tank is a pretty good choice for that purpose. It's not exceptional. Like it's not going to go toe to toe with other mediums. It is still a support unit, but it does enough things to a mediocre extent that it makes a nice addition to whatever composition you've got. But obviously the goal and the name of the game with the Breakthrough Battle Group is to make it to the Tiger so that you can close out the game. Finally, we're at Terror. Terror, I think, is in the OP category as a battle group. We will talk about the Terror battle group by busting it open here. So Terror Tactics is full of just exceptional abilities, especially as you get to the late game. So I'll talk about each. Now, compositions that you're going to want to think about. I actually have 2 Terror battle group videos, so maybe I'll link both in the description. One where I'm playing tier 3 and one where I'm playing tier 2. And I talk about the differences of how to use Terror battle group with each of those. To start, generally speaking, the machine gun camouflage is just way better than heavy gunnery right now. I actually think this is a great ability and has potential, but it's just overshadowed right now by the strength of the machine gun camo. The ambush bonus on the MG42, the ability to like dart between cover while still cloaked is just insane. It's honestly like probably what really pushes this into the OP category for battle groups. Yeah, it's super, super good. And you can build a lot of machine guns with this battle group because of the camouflage. Eliminates a lot of the weaknesses that you would typically find with machine guns. The weaknesses are usually like when they get spotted, they can be shelled or flanked. But if your machine gun is never spotted, then you don't have those problems. And you get all the benefits of the firepower and then some because of the ambush bonus, right? So it just makes this ridiculously powerful. Defend the Fatherland versus No Quarter. I think No Quarter is generally a better choice, especially if you're playing tier 3 with Panzergrenadiers, because they want to close the gap and get within range to trigger this bonus. And even better, if you get on top of whatever units are suppressed, then you're just going to kill them super fast. Defend the Fatherland. I'm not a huge fan of these kinds of abilities where it's like you have to lose guys to make them useful. But what this thing is really good for, hear me, what this ability is really good for is protecting a unit that is getting dove while it's retreating. So like think of like your opponent is trying to wipe a squad while it's retreating back to base. This ability is the perfect time to trigger that because the damage resistance kicking in will oftentimes will save the squad from whatever threat that it's facing and allow them to get back to base and save you from a squad wipe. So that's kind of the context that I'm usually using Defend the Fatherland. Otherwise, I feel like it's just too much of a liability, honestly. Like it's pretty easy to kind of forget that you have this until it's a little bit too late. So I'm not using this that often, mostly in that retreating context that I described. The KT we'll come back to because that's a unit. On the left side, Terror Tactics. All of these are so good, dude. All of these are great. I'll talk about the context for each. So generally speaking, if I'm playing tier 2 with Jägers, I'm going for the Interrogate passive. With officer quarters, I mean, the combination of the intel that you get by interrogating the enemy troops and the XP bonus you get your Jägers to Vet 3 way faster, and that just makes them way, way stronger. Vet 3 Jägers, super difficult to kill and get some really, really great combat bonuses. And so Interrogate just helps them get there that much faster, which is really, really nice. If I'm also playing tier 2, generally I'm going for Propaganda Leaflet Drop because, like I mentioned, we don't have indirect in tier 2.5. We don't have any indirect fire or like artillery that we can use in tier 2.5. The Propaganda Leaflet Drop is the greatest supplement to big pushes that are combined arms with vehicles and infantry, where you don't have artillery to soften up defensive positions, because what you can do is, as you're pushing in, drop this on your opponent's team weapons, especially their AT guns, and it will force them to fold and retreat back to base, which is going to allow you to maximize the damage that you're doing on that push, right? Especially if you're doing like a big armored engagement. Think of like your opponent is going to have their armor protected by anti-tank guns. If you can get deep in their lines and drop this on the AT guns, all of a sudden the AT guns are hightailing it back to base, and their armor is left unsupported against what you're bringing to bear. This can create some really favorable engagements for you and allow you to capitalize and like deal some really significant damage on the back of this propaganda leaflet drop. The other nice thing is that the leaflet drop actually lingers, so that if your opponent walks back into that area, you can use this for area denial purposes as well. If they walk back into it, they may still be forced to retreat after 3 seconds. Then, of course, we have the V1 Rocket Strike. This thing is like crazy strong right now. I really like this thing. I think the strength of it is fine for how expensive it is. It makes for some really like funny clips that I've seen where like big blobs of tanks or other units are just getting totally wiped out by this thing. Honestly, I feel like we need more tools like this in the game, low key. But I really like the V1 Rocket Strike, but I do think what it's missing right now is it needs a louder audio cue. It's kind of difficult to read in team games. But yeah, best way to use this, guys, just try not to be predictable with it. Like, if your opponent knows that you're playing Terror Battlegroup and they spot you, starting to probe an area or get aggressive, and then they hear the audio cue for this thing, they're probably going to know where it's going to land, right? Where this thing is really awesome is like if you have a late game Kettenkrad that you can use to scope out a position either long before or even after an attack where your opponent is trying to reorganize, because they're just going to have no idea where it's coming from. And it's also good in team games in that regard, and you want to make sure you have perspective on the whole map, because when you call it in, you don't really know, like your opponents don't really know where it's going to land, right? And so using a V1 on like not your direct opponent, but like maybe somebody that your teammate is going up against is a great idea. You just want to be as unpredictable as possible with the V1. And also in your own sense, you want to be predictive in the placement of it so that you're forcing your opponent to consolidate in the area that it's going to land, right? So when you're fighting tanks, maybe you want to drop it behind the enemy tanks, right? If you see a whole bunch of team weapons that are like running up the map, you can maybe kind of like time it. By the way, it's 12 seconds. It's 12 seconds from launching it to landing. So just keep that in mind. You can kind of use that to try to time your attacks with the V1 Rocket Strike. Now, on the other hand, if I am playing Tier 3 with Panzergrenadiers, Contempt for the Weak is just the best. It takes everything that the Panzergrenadier is and makes it better. Panzergrenadiers already have a 1.5 capture multiplier, which means that they are able to capture territory faster than other units in general. And this extra 33% on top of that just makes it even faster for them specifically, because they already have that multiplier in place. Obviously, you're going to trigger this passive more often because Panzergrenadiers, they want to close the gap. The 18 range, guys, by the way, this is about half of the maximum infantry engagement range. So as long as you're about to the midway point, you will trigger this response from enemy units that are retreating. And then obviously you get the bonuses of the extra rate of fire, which is amazing. Now, as you move into the second tree, in tier 3, we have access to the Nebel, so we may not necessarily need the propaganda leaflet drop to soften up our opponent's team weapons. We may be able to use the Nebel to do that. And this creates an opportunity for us to use the Jericho Loiter. The Jericho is going to make targets easier to hit and slow down enemy infantry. Which allows our Panzergrenadiers to close the gap and trigger Contempt for the Weak. And it's just a crazy snowball effect between these two abilities as you're doing big infantry pushes, especially with Panzergrenadiers. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way, but I found like these to be kind of the optimal ways. This is kind of designed for tier 2 play. From my perspective, this is designed for tier 3. The King Tiger. The final point in our breakdown. The King Tiger is a strong heavy tank. It is not OP, not to the level that the Tiger is. It has very distinct and very exploitable weaknesses. What is the King Tiger good at? This thing is it's the epitome of a spearhead vehicle. It is the perfect vehicle to slap on the front line, absorb damage, and just deal massive sweeping blows to enemy infantry or vehicles because of the super high damage of the KT's cannon. The KT and the Tiger have different area of effect profiles. I'll explain what I mean in a second here when I bring it up. So this is the King Tiger, this is the Tiger. I'll compare the 88mm cannon on each. So you can see here, the AoE profile on the regular Tiger is 4.5, okay? So the radius, the blast radius of the impact of the Tiger shells is 4.5. On the KT, it's 5. It's even bigger. And what that means is bigger damage to clumps of infantry. Now you'll notice oh, you actually can't tell from here. So it says they're both about 8 RPM, which is true. But the Tiger has a little bit of an edge on rate of fire compared to the King Tiger. The King Tiger has stronger frontal and side armor compared to the Tiger. You can see here, which makes it perfect for spearheading, like I mentioned. In most circumstances, I think the only thing that this will lose 1v1 in a frontal exclusive battle is the Black Prince. I've tested, and I've also seen like it will also lose to the Pershing unless it has Vet 1. If it has Vet 1, then it will beat the Pershing. In 1v1 with no abilities. But yeah, guys, this vehicle is basically, you're using this for an end game push, generally speaking, and you need to make sure that it's adequately backed up by whatever other vehicles you have, whether it's StuGs or Wirbelwinds and Marders. This thing needs support. It's a spearhead vehicle. It is the tip of the spear. It's designed to absorb damage and deal damage. But you cannot fight with this thing alone because it is incredibly slow. Look at the difference in speed and acceleration between these two units. So we've got 3.25 speed, 1 acceleration, 1.5 acceleration, 3.8 speed on the Tiger. The other thing about the KT is this is the only vehicle in the game that moves slower backwards than it does forwards. Every other vehicle in the game, it has equal speed going forwards and backwards. The KT is the only one in the game that goes slower moving backwards. So when you advance with the KT, you need to be very careful because it's very easy to get caught out as overextended with the KT because you won't be able to reverse very quickly. As long as this thing is properly protected, it can be a game-ending unit, but against like big groups of enemy mediums, it's difficult to use because it's very easy for them to get behind you and just take this thing out really quickly. which is why it needs the support like we did, like we talked about. The packs, the Marters, StuGs, whatever. If this is your only vehicle on the field, it's just a recipe to lose it very quickly. So if your opponent is amassing a critical, like a whole bunch of mediums, the KT is probably not the best choice for you, unfortunately. You know, if they change the reverse speed or like the rear armor damage, maybe, but you know, at the moment in its current state, this thing, very strong as a spearhead vehicle, very good at creating space and dealing big damage to infantry and vehicles alike, but it is very susceptible to being flanked, and also, more specifically, the Airborne Battlegroup for USF, the P-47 rocket strafe. If your opponent uses that ability correctly, it's almost impossible to avoid it for the KT, and it will just die. And there's really no way to avoid it because it's too slow. So something else for you to be wary of in your games, like if your opponents are playing airborne, you need to be really careful about deciding whether or not you're going to go for KT. If your opponent went for bombing run, you might be fine. But if rocket strafe is on the table, it's very dangerous to go for the KT. You can lose it in an instant, just like that. Yeah, that's it for the KT. KT versus Tiger. Tiger is better generally overall, but KT better for the purpose of spearheading, better AoE profile, like I mentioned. And the Vet 1 on it is really nice for making it a great bulwark vehicle to just absorb damage and threat from your opponent, while your Marters, your Jägers, Wirbelwinds, etc., clean them up and do the work on the flanks and the sides of the KT. That's it. That's our tier list, guys. You know, battle groups, I think you guys have lots of options in terms of what is strong, what is capable. Terror, you know, there are some great tools in here. I think like the V1 in its current state especially is really a tipping point for this thing. The camel machine guns are what really pushed this battle group from strong into OP. The KT, you know, good unit, very solid, but again has very distinct weaknesses compared to his little brother Tiger 1. But I hope you guys learned something. I know I've been, what am I at now? 2 hours and 15 minutes, my God. Been yapping for a long time, but I hope this was insightful. I hope you learned something. Would really love to get some more feedback on how you guys feel about this format and the length of the video especially. Like, do we want even 2-hour videos, or is this too much? This is really my experiment, and I thought Wehrmacht was perfect for this because I feel like I think they have the largest unit roster in the game. So I thought, you know, if I was going to go crazy deep on any faction, this would be the one to do it on. So that's it, guys. That's the battle groups. Those are the units. If you're looking for examples of how to execute some of the strategies I've described, I've got lots of how-to guides, as well as just general replay breakdowns where I'm describing my thought process. I mean, all the how-tos, any video that I did before the original how-tos, which were very recent, is the same format. I'm describing my strategy, I'm describing micro decisions, macro decisions. It's the same format. I kind of just rebranded it as how-to guides very recently, especially because of all the new players. So anyway, like I said, I hope you guys learned something, and let me know what you think about this new format. You know, is it too long? Is it too much? I'd like to know. If you feel like there was anything that I was belaboring too much or spending too much time on, I'd love to hear that too. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. See you, nerds.